you would basically get the same incentives on repeat over time. So our recommendation is to not choose those and to choose something different. But of course, you all can do whatever you want to that.
And these are all on the website of the, like, Commerce has and that, what's going on.
The commerce incentives should be on that transparency portal. I don't know about all of the other, so the things that are not commerce driven.
I'm just thinking ahead now, and I probably shouldn't be, but I was just thinking, coming from like a banking background, maybe we ought to think about proposing some kind of formula that they have to do an annual report or something on all these others that nobody's looking at. You know, how much money's used, how much on everyone, though.
So we do, and there is a requirement that Commerce actually reports to LPAC every year. So each January, it's a very tight window of time that's written into statute at the end of January where Commerce presents to LPAC on its major programs.
See, I was just thinking some of these programs would be nice to know, require them on all of them. I know it'd be a little bit of work, but say, this is the dollars, this is how many people use it. I mean, we might find over a period of time, some of these programs need to drop off. But, I mean, we're kind of using the audits to get that now. But if, you know, a bank does quarterly reports, well, if we had an annually or maybe every other year report on every one of these, how much was used over, you know, a period of time, and what's the dollar amounts, how many recipients, just a simple sheet. I think that would be beneficial because then you'd really get to see every one of these programs, if they're being used or not. Because some of them in the beginning will be used heavy, and then as they work, they will start to disappear and needing to be used. And, you know, maybe that's a way to unwind by self-reporting some of these. But I'm thinking proposed legislation. Go ahead, Representative Williams.
Okay, so if I'm understanding correctly, everything in the green would be your recommendation for us for 23, 24, 25, or 24, 25, 26?
23, 24, 25.
Okay, and so okay, then I'm just going to throw out an idea for our group. You said 3 small or 2 small or 1 large. One that I think a lot of people have questions would be 43, the TEFI. And though it's new, I think it's just a complicated one about the fiduciary trust. Is that the correct one? And pushing it as far out, you know, it would be the last year would be my recommendation for consideration from our group, because it is so new and there have been questions relating to it that we've seen come out, and I think it'd be really important for us to follow up on it. So my thoughts.
Representative Burrows, you have any? What I was thinking was, you know, we could one each, or, you know, if that, you know, if you wanted to pick one, I'd pick one. And, but I mean, I'm fine with doing the 43, the TEFI, and you want to do that in the last year, so we get a little time on it. And, you know, I know that's a program that there's not a lot of knowledge on how it all works, but it looks like it could only be a benefit. But I know there were some questions with some of the participants, we'll say it like that. So, I mean, I think that would be a good one to be able to, go ahead, Kristen.
So just one comment, because you're talking about potentially having each of you choose one. This one, we are considering a large resource requirement, which means it would just be that one.
It'd just be one, huh?
But that's based on, something else you're going to see about that one out to the right-hand side. It is because it's one of those newly created incentives, statute requires us to review all new incentives that fit the parameters defined in state law the year after they're created. And so we are currently doing a little bit on it. Again, it's so new. It's basically going to be like a description of what it is, and if we can give you any information about how it's been used so far, because I think it's still in kind of a pilot status. So
Is there any
we
way?
know enough about it to know it'll be a complicated one. So if it is added to the schedule, we do think it would be large.
Well, I don't know then. So that's gonna be audited anyway, or reviewed. Go ahead. So you're gonna review it anyway, you are right now.
We are right now. It's pretty cursory because it is so new. So all of those newly created ones are going to be a much smaller. I mean, this is something you all will see. We hope to have our first kind of batch finished by the December LPAC meeting, and it's going to be more like a memo style thing with pretty little information because it is so new at this point. So adding it to the schedule for a later year could allow additional time to be able to look at more, say more. Perhaps there's other companies participating at that point. So, worth considering.
Okay. Let's think about that for a second then. Well, so what would the committee rather do? Would it rather do 3 smaller audits, or would it, one large audit? Representative Burrows, do you have a comment on that? Yeah, it was just reviewed in 21. Far right, yep. So we just got done with that. And that's a large one. And not for me to cut in, but I think you kind of recommend 11, 12, or on down. These top ones have all been just reviewed, the top, 1 through 9, except the ones that are on the green. Go ahead, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And commenting on 33, EDIF, that would be kind of like us evaluating ourselves because we've been rating that EDIF fund for probably before I was in the legislature. And I do think that's good in the sense that we know it has not always been used for economic development purposes. I think we've tried to shift gears in the last few years. So I think we know what happened with that. It was just a slush fund.
There's a sheet, and I had it last year when I carried the bill. And, to me, what was really crazy, how little was going to problem gaming. And, I mean, it was practically no money, and everybody makes a big deal out of the problem gaming. Not saying it's not a problem, but very little of the gambling money goes, and it gets rated. It's, it's just another piggy bank for, our budget to, at times especially, they've really rated it, but they use it as, money goes in, and then we figure a place to spend it. Go ahead, Chris.
Just something else to consider on this. So we did review the EDIF fund in 2019 and issued a report. So it's not as recent as some of these other ones we're talking about, but it's still a few years old. So I just pulled it up, but the objectives of that audit were the questions were, does the state's process to administer EDIF follow best practices? And are the programs that receive EDIF funding consistent with the intended use of the fund?
I think a lot of that is what kind of condition we're in.
Those were different times back then.
Yeah, I mean, when we're really short, they.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So also, if there are 3 or 2 small ones, I have no problem with that. What we might also do is just have Kristen note the list of items that we hope will come up in the future to be put on the schedule, at least so that whoever sits in our seats next year, the next year, and the next year will know which ones we thought were perhaps important, and then we didn't select them, but at least they would be noted that we recognize those as potentially something to review in the future if we don't select them today.
Well, and I think, starting there, 43 would be at the top of that list. Representative Burrows, do you have something to say?
Well, if we're going to look at small ones, I think one of them is, and we talked about this the last time, the swine facility improvement credit, and there was some ineligibility or eligibility restricted in 2013. We had that discussion last meeting as to why the eligibility was restricted. And is it even being utilized now? I'm sorry, number 28.
28.
If we're, the reason why I say that, because it's environmental conservation, but there was just an announcement that one of the swine industries was heavily fined the other day for something, and I'm trying to think of what it was. It's just one of the numbers, however you all want to do it, but has to deal with ag, and maybe if we look at ag, local government, whatever, just 3 small ones and kind of see if there's any difference in them, or if you want to be a big program. I'm open to any of these. I looked at the insurance one. For insurance is the out-of-state premiums that the insurance companies pay, and I think the chairman and I have been through that committee a couple of times on insurance, and I know it's a fair and equitable issue with our insurance department.
Well, and one I would look at is alternative fuel tax
Yes,
credits.
that's another good one.
I think, part of auditing, I've sat on bank boards and chaired audit committees, is you gotta pick some of these that no one thinks you'll ever pick. 17.
Yeah, I've got 28, 17, and 13, so you've hit 2 of them that.
And I bet you some of these have never been audited. I think, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, I know it wouldn't be a popular one, but 19 might be one too, the child daycare assistant credit. Probably not too popular, but being sporadic, that's what I'm all about. I'm open for anything. Do you have something, Representative Williams, that,
Well, I like your suggestion of 17. I would ask Kristen, have we done that one before in LPA?
No.
So I'm really intrigued by the fact that it has not been done. Is there anything on our list that would go well with that, Kristen, in terms of we haven't reviewed it before?
So I would say most of them in yellow that are an income tax credit that are marked as small in that right-hand column are ones we LPA have not reviewed. Most of those. So there's a few exceptions, like if you look at number 24, the low-income student scholarship credit, We just did a limited scope audit on that program, but that's the exception. Most of those are ones we have not looked at.
I'm gonna throw one out now. I don't know if it doesn't look like it's been restricted since 2013, but 22. I do know, from 2006 to 13, you know, you're talking in the billions that was used. I don't know if that's something we got. I don't know, there's at least 3 refineries, but there might be others that qualify under this. Well, I'm not for sure, but I can tell you the dollars that were spent in about 2010, 9 or 10, I did a review because I was bringing an amendment on that credit. There was like 2 or 3 credits, and you might remember, these are the ones Carl Holmes brought.
I'm
Yeah.
running through my Rolodex
Carl
now.
Crable said when we passed them, we were crazy, we didn't know how much we were spending, and later I looked at them credits, and I think that was the one, I mean, we're talking over $1 billion.
That was some Superfund sites.
Go ahead.
Again, the reason you're seeing like a 0 and a dash there is because at least so we pulled information for fiscal year 2018 from the Department of Revenue, and it was not used at least in that year. So we don't have years before or after to speak to that kind of trend over time. At least in fiscal year 2018, there was no one was using it.
Well, and it was changed in 2013, it looks like to me. They restricted the eligibility. I don't know, you know, I know we were pretty bad financial shape in them periods, and so I don't know what they did there, but I know in the earlier years that one cost us a lot of money, and if we did it, we'd want to go back to the last time it's been reviewed at least.
So, Mr. Chairman, let's ask this. We see a number of these that are eligibility restricted beginning in 2013, and those were different financial times. Can staff guide us as to which programs have not been used since 2013? That might give us, that we can eliminate and not have included on this list?
Probably be nice to know their restrictions too, how tight, and, you know, did it tighten it up so much that it'll never be used? Go ahead.
In 2013, there was a tax bill that put basically the same restriction on a lot of these income tax credits. And that restriction made the income tax credit only available to corporations, where before they were available to any type of income taxpayer. So the limitation is limiting it only to corporate taxpayers.
Well, and I think on this one, what we would probably see is the numbers of people that would qualify for it are very few, and you'd have to catch them, or they would use it at the next big expansion, and that probably doesn't happen that often. That's my guess.
Well, the question would then arise, should we release the ineligibility? If they're eligible in large corporations, what happens if we recommend these cities be eligible to others now?
I think that might be after, like, the alternative fuel tax, if we review it, and it hasn't been reviewed for a long time, so we're gonna go back a ways. And, you know, if that needs to be, then that would be proposed legislation, I believe.
And we can do that as a subcommittee recommending to the full committee that advance it forward if we chose to do so.
Well, I think we're here to propose the audits. And then as we do the audits, then if something comes out of an audit, then the whole committee can propose legislation to remove some of these restrictions. You know, it's definitely, they were trying to make cuts then. And, you know, it's, now I look at like 19, what are them restrictions? And so that's only a business on 19 too that is eligible for them daycare funds or, so a small daycare operation, if it wasn't set up as, I guess a DBA would qualify, or does it have to be an LLC or C Corp or? Well, and the thing about it is, people become one or another for tax purposes. And so, you know, sometimes you're an LLC, sometimes you're an S Corp. And people move back and forth between their charters for taxes. So I guess maybe I'm getting farther outside the conversation. Go ahead, Christian.
Maybe, again, this is just something to help guide the conversation, but I think it's important to also note that, so statute, as it's defining economic development evaluations, is different than like a performance audit. So statute lays out several things that these evaluations have to include. So it's a description of the program, its history and its goals, it's a literature review, which includes a comparison to other states. And the key is estimating its fiscal and economic impact, which are defined in statute, but that's really supposed to be the focus of these evaluations. So again, just something to further though, what exactly is our charge when we get into evaluating is, at least to some extent, defined in statute.
Well, yeah, that's fine. Questions? Okay. It'd be good, though. I hate to ask you guys to do a little legwork. I don't know if research can just tell us what them, you know, give us a one page or what's the restriction on these credits, you know, for the future. Because, I mean, some of them we might want to open back up. What's our third one then? So we picked 17, and I was talking about 22. Is that the?
I choose if, for example, you wanted 22, I love the 17 as well, then, I mean, I like the idea of getting more information about the child daycare assistance credit. When was it used? How was it used? Why did it stop being used?
Okay, let's back up and let's just say, I'll say my pick will be 17. Representative Williams, what would your pick be?
19.
19?
And then just having Teffy on the list for, just to note for future members that that one should hopefully be looked at in the future.
Okay. Representative Burrows, what would you pick? I mean, somewhere down the road, maybe put 22 on the list. I think it would be good, but, you know, that can be down the road. Representative Burrows? You want to do that swine?
with
think
lagoon
this-
leakage and everything else that was going on and contamination. So that's the only reason why I picked it, to see if it was even still beneficial today.
Well, and that's fine. I think swine come in 98, it looks like. I remember being up here for dinner when I was part of Water One, hearing House members and senators, our Johnson County delegation, talk about the bill being debated at that time. So if, you know, if that's something you want to put on there, we can do that.
Well, it's just a point of discussion. I don't know what we get out of it in reference to this eligibility restriction. Let me ask this of staff, how does that impact the research that you do? Does it limit you from a certain amount of years to information? What does that language do? Does it make the audit easier for you because there's only certain corporations that could qualify for that? Can you kind of give me some guidance as to exactly how that impacts how you might perform your audit?
I mean, so great question. I think some of it depends on like how far back in time we went, and not knowing what this looks like year over year in terms of how many people, or in this instance, businesses have claimed that credit. I don't exactly know, but if, let's just hypothetically, I'm going to use this as an example. If we looked at the history of this and saw that it has not been used since 2013, I think we would dig into and spend more time evaluating what happened, what did it look like before then, some of that information, because there wouldn't be obviously anything to review after that point in time, so that it may put the focus on what happened in 2013 and why. But I don't think that it would preclude us from reviewing anything. It's more, if no one's using it, there isn't really anything to
My guess,
analyze.
that's a credit that got used very heavily for a short period of
Yeah,
time.
that's what I'm wondering.
And, you know, once you kind of solve the problem, you know, then how many new ones will? I mean, it probably, but I mean, I'd love to, you know, I think that's why we're here to audit. I mean, we're not only looking to audit, but, you know, at the end of the audit, there might be a suggestion to remove that or change it. Representative Williams, you have another comment?
Yes, thank you. Okay, I actually, based on your request to have kind of a review, maybe research, take a look at eligibility restrictions beginning in 2013, since the one I selected 19 doesn't appear to be used, or at least it wasn't used in 2018. If we're going to look at eligibility restrictions that began in 2013, then I would rather do number 13 and have a better understanding of how 13 is used, where it's being used, is there a cap? Because that's something that could potentially be promoted around our state if, you know, because it looks like it's 2.8 million was used in 2018. So I would switch mine to 13.
Okay.
Is that the one that's tied to education funding? That if they write a check to private schools, they get a tax credit?
This one was in 94, come into effect, so.
Yeah, that one was for tax credit scholarship program was more like the 2008.
I just remember the cap being somewhat,
It's 10 million.
yeah.
I was here when that was passed, so. 94, I wasn't here. No. Oh, yep, right there, yeah. It's 2014.
Just did that.
I'm all right with that. 13, so we'll take off 19 and put 13.
Yeah.
Line 17, Representative Burrows.
I really don't. I mean, no matter which one of these we do, the small ones are fine, because we're allowing us all to pick one. I'll go along with whatever you all want on a small one. As I stated, this eligibility requirement is of interest to me, and what's happened since then. But, I mean, I look at the Insurance Guarantee Association, I'm looking at 35, 36, 39. These, these are just some of the stuff. You can even go to 40 for that matter. That when we look at those happen to deal with tax credits. I think most of these others are one of them's environmental, and 17 and 19.
That's a pretty good one, but is that a small one, 40?
Yeah, 40 is a small one.
Yeah, I know, and was put in place in 1967. What is that? Go ahead, Christian.
So just to clarify, the small and large designation is in terms of how much we think it would take of our time, like LPA resources, not necessarily the size of the credit. So we're trying to estimate like how complicated would it be to review something like that? Maybe we've underestimated, I'm not sure.
So you think it might be a large one, huh?
Sounds like others might.
$358 million. I mean. It's yours, ball.
Yeah, I like 40, but,
Let's do 40.
and staff,
Now I'm curious what I
darts
said.
at me if you'd like. I mean, there may be tax credits on there that, we no longer need.
Well, that's part of the hope we can find some things to remove. Okay. I like it. Go ahead, Christian.
I think we need to have you all make a formal motion to, I would suggest, and I'll look to Tamara for this, but suggest actually naming, I'm sure number would suffice of all for everything, so that if you guys are okay with the ones staff have proposed already in green, to list those and then the three
Okay.
that you're choosing to move above the line. So a motion and a second to approve those.
A motion to approve all the green, 13, 17, and 40 audits. Okay. I made the motion.
I'd second that motion.
And we got a second. Any questions or comments? All, huh? You third it?
Yeah.
All in favor? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Against nay, passes. Okay, that wasn't too bad. I think we all got a bite at the pie. Okay, we'll move on to the consent calendar. Okay, turn to what, tab A? And that's the minutes from last meeting. And let's see, we need approval. Nope, it's on the consent calendar, so as long as there's no objections, they're approved. And we're adjourned. Thank you. No?
No, we're done.